Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll get started in just a moment. It looks like we're going to have a number of people join us today. Just a couple of housekeeping rules for us. We'll have a quick presentation for you. We'll walk you through the guidelines that have been updated recently, and then we'll jump into our Q&A session. Our hope is to be able to give you as much time as possible to ask questions. To keep everything really clean for everyone, please use the Q&A button that's at the bottom of your Zoom screen to post your questions. Or you can use the chat if you're having some issues with the Q&A, and we'll go through them one by one. We'll be answering all questions live. If there's something that we are unable to address at this time or something that we need to clarify a bit further, we will reach out to you afterwards. Just give it one more minute. Okay, thank you so much for joining us today for the GoAERO Updated Guidelines webinar. As we've noted in the Zoom invite and all of our descriptions, we offered an update to the guidelines about 10 days ago. You can find them on herox.com/GoAERO, and you can find all of the updates under the update section as well, so you get an understanding of what's been changed. And we're going to use this opportunity to walk you through the updated guidelines, the changes to the timeline, and then take an opportunity to answer any questions that you might have. So we'll get started with our quick video.
See heroes every day. Heroes who look past danger to help people in need. Heroes who step in to be the difference between triumph and tragedy. And heroes who use their minds to create technology that saves lives. We need those heroes. We're launching a new prize competition for a singular mission, saving lives. More than $2 million in total prizes is on the line for the best thinkers, creators, and inventors to stretch and challenge their minds, to change the way we reach people in the face of disaster, unlocking a new era of rescue response. An era that unleashes the power of autonomy, speed, and precision. Alongside NASA and Pratt & Whitney, GoAERO is looking for the brightest, boldest, and bravest innovators to change the way we rescue and respond to disaster. This is your chance to make history and save lives. Join us. Ready, set, GoAERO.
Okay, and now it's my pleasure to introduce GoAERO CEO, Gwen Lader.
Thank you, Nidhi, and thank you all for joining us today. We are quite excited to present the updated technical rules and guidelines, as well as provide some background information. So as you all know, by this point, GoAERO is a 3-year competition with over $2 million in prizes. We truly are focused on the mission of saving lives. And so we ask teams around the world to build an emergency response flyer that is capable of rescuing people and performing critical response missions. To that end, we ask that these flyers that you all will be building are safe and portable and robust and autonomy enabled, so that they can respond to not only everyday medical emergencies, but also to challenges posed by natural disasters and humanitarian crises, as well as climate change. So to that end, we have asked teams to create their flyer, and we have 3 different stages as part of the competition. Stage 1 is the stage 1 is the paper stage. Stage 2 is the prototype stage, and teams can make full-scale or subscale prototypes. And stage 3 culminates in the final fly-off, where we have now 3 missions, which we will run through, as well as a top prize of $1 million and an autonomy prize, as well as a disruptor prize. Now, going back to what is central about what we are doing, we are asking teams to build a robust flyer that is trailerable and portable. So if you imagine on one end of the spectrum is a helicopter, and helicopters are incredibly useful first responder tools, but helicopters are expensive to procure, more expensive to operate over the years, require a pilot, and have trouble getting into very tight spaces. At the other end of the spectrum are recreational drones that are very good at search and can deliver burgers and things like that, but at this moment are not delivering first responders to people or helping people. So when you think of those 2 different areas of helicopter and then, recreational drones, what we are asking teams to create is something new in the middle that can really serve as an emergency response tool. And frankly, after over a year of speaking with hundreds of aviation experts and first responders, this is the additional technology that first responders are requesting, and frankly, that they need in today's changing world. Right now, when natural disasters seem to be on the rise in 2022, there were over 380 natural disasters worldwide, affecting 185 million people, with 30,000 lives lost due to them. And of course, we all know that around the world, millions of people live in ambulance deserts where it takes more than 25 minutes or more for help to reach them on a good day, when the sun is shining, when nothing is wrong. And so we have been informed by our partners and by experts who are engaged in daily first response. And we are driving towards producing technology that is truly focused on this singular mission of saving lives. When I say we, it is not us alone. We are supported by a number of different phenomenal partners around the world, including Boeing and NASA and RTX, Iridium, X-Wing, Global Aerospace, SAP, as well as over 30 different first responder and aerospace organizations, also globally located. So without further ado, I am very pleased to turn this over to my colleague, Sky. And actually, one more thing to mention, you as teams are not alone. We have mentors working one-on-one with teams. We have expert lectures. Actually, the first one will begin next week. You should all have had emails on that as a way of registering for that. And we will continue with our expert lecture series throughout the course of the competition. We have many for May and June and July and August and September already scheduled, and we continue to build out that educational platform. So we thank you for joining us today, and Sky, take it away.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so today we'll be talking about the technical rules, and we'll be able to leave a lot of time for answering your questions. Yeah, so basically, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, anywhere you might be. So what I'm going to be focusing on today is the rule book for the fly-off itself. So we have the 3 stages of the competition. Today's focus will be on the fly-off. Questions about stage 1 and stage 2, which are a kind of a digital submission, with the bulk of which is a 18-page technical report, and for stage 2 edition showing that a prototype is flown. questions on those are totally fair game for Q&A, but what I'm going to talk about right now is the rulebook. So this is, you should be seeing my screen now. You see this is the herox.com/GoAERO website. And there's a lot of content here. And to get to the rulebook itself, it's quite buried and pretty hard to find. The easiest way I find is just like from the homepage, instead of having to do a bunch of scrolling, just do a search for rulebook. And once you get to a hyperlink, that'll get you to a PDF. And this is what we'll be mostly talking about here. So I'm just going to walk through this, and then we'll be able to get into questions. So this is the PDF of the rulebook. It's 9 pages, I believe. The first 5 talk about the missions. And then the rest of it is, I'm not going to call it fine print. I'll call it medium print because you definitely should read it. Fine print implies that you can get by without reading it. But this succinct document is kind of what you need as engineers to go and design and develop a system to be successful at this fly off. So first off, the GoAERO competition is a competition between single occupant vertical takeoff and landing vehicles. And this single occupant, for the purposes of the competition, which will take place over about a long weekend, has to be this 125-pound mannequin stand-in. So there's no human crew is allowed on board during flight. So for the competition, that's the case. Now, whatever your application may be, whether it's wildfire or ambulance or search and rescue or whatever it may be, that's up to you. But for this competition, the occupant needs to be this mannequin, which we'll talk about in a bit. And there are these 3 missions: productivity, adversity, and maneuvering. The winner of each of those missions, there's a $150,000 prize for each of those. And then aggregate performance in all of those missions determines the top prize winner. So going through the missions, the productivity mission is one that shows that your system is able to quickly deploy from a roadable configuration, so basically being trailered or on a truck, and then continuously ferrying payload. So it's in 2 parts. Each of these sections of the rulebook is laid out first talking about, quick summary of what it's testing. Then it's talking about how it's scored to see who wins. In this case, it's the ratio of the total payload weight ferried to the total system weight. And that system weight includes not only the aircraft, but also, any spares or extra fuel or extra batteries that were used and things like that. And then it talks about the operation zone. And operation zone is the area where the vehicle is allowed to touch down with its undercarriage. In this case, it's a trapezoid 100 feet long and kind of tapered toward the course end to, you get more length to work with if you have good lateral control. But it is in 2 phases. First is the deployment phase, which just has to do with showing up on site at the mission area and showing that you can go from that roadable configuration that meets kind of highway legal width, length, height requirements to a flyable configuration. And so this requires getting there, like driving there with the system, and then preparing the aircraft for flight. When you're preparing the aircraft for flight, you say, okay, we're ready, or you basically can say, okay, we're going to pause here. Then without touching anything, you can spend as much time as you want looking at the system to inspect to make sure that everything is set up correctly and safely. So you have up to 20 minutes to do that, combined with the limit of 30 minutes to do the setup. That's a good chunk of time to get that done. So it still does require things to be quick. There are also incentives for the top prize to do it even quicker, but we'll talk about that later. And then, so once you're ready to fly, the timer of how quickly you've been able to set up and get ready to fly ends when you actually start flying. So that's where the flight phase comes in. And in the flight phase, that's just about, first you fly an empty segment of flight. It's about a couple miles of air distance. And then you come back, land, and then you have what are called payload handlers. These are people who, after the aircraft has touched down, they're allowed to go into that operation zone, load payload or unload payload, or refuel or whatever needs to be done to the aircraft. And then they can clear out, and the aircraft can take off and go fly another segment, come back, unload payload, fly an empty segment, alternate back and forth, and this is done for 90 minutes. So that's summarized here. Key to this mission is that you can add on additional payloads. So you could just fly the Alex mannequin, Or you could fly some sandbags, some rebar, or you could fly all three at once, or any combination that makes sense for you. So you can carry more payload and get a higher score that way, or do more trips with less payload, however you choose to do it. And then, yeah, so I think I mentioned 90 minutes, and when that timer's ended, then that's determines how much how much payload you've moved. That's added up, divided by the total system weight. The system is weighed kind of using scales that the whole ground vehicle can fit on. So on the way to the mission area, that whole system is weighed, and then after it's unloaded and ready for flight, then then kind of the empty vehicle is weighed again, and that's how that difference is done. The total amount that you need to ferry for this whole mission in that 90 minutes is 1,250 pounds. So that's, if you're just using the Alex mannequin only, then that's 10 trips. And what else is still important to mention? Yeah, you can have up to 4 payload handlers / pit crew. Yeah, you are allowed to just have your vehicle sitting on top of the trailer or truck and just take off straight from there. When you're doing the setup and the deployment, it doesn't necessarily have to be removed and separate from your ground transport vehicle. And let's see. Oh yeah, important to mention that the human payload handlers, they do count toward that weight of your system. We won't actually weigh them as people, but they will count as individuals. So the first couple count as 50 pounds, and then each additional one will count as an additional 50 pounds of weight. Cool. Sorry, forgot to mention, this is the mission diagram. So this cyan area is used in this document to depict the operation zones, or the OZs. And in this case, this is that gutter around which that's an area where you can have your ground transport vehicle for doing the setup. And this is just set up where there's kind of a baseline and an end line, and you just fly laps between them in order to, that's what constitutes flying a segment. The adversity mission is just about being able to take off and land in difficult conditions. So you start and end at the base. So there's a list of operation zones. Start and end at the base, which is just a hard surface. And in any order that you choose, you need to go and visit each of these zones and touch down, stay there for 2 minutes, and then take off and go to a different one. So there's a sand pit, there's an incline, there's a wet and rainy one with standing water. There's also, and with standing water, you can either like hover or float on top of the surface of the water, or you can just choose to rest on the bottom of this pool. It's about a knee-deep water. Gusty, swirly wind conditions. And then there's also a zone called down here. Don't forget to read it because it's on the next page. The unknown, which is kind of a large area, but within this large area, there will be just one area that's fully clear of obstacles. So, and that's not going to be knowable from where you set up. So it won't be in sight of the ground station or the starting location. So yeah, I forgot to mention this is just based on time. So the fastest to go and complete this mission. Same for the maneuvering mission. It's ranked by fastest time. But the maneuvering mission is about running a slalom course with all the obstacles. There are basically you do 4 segments total, starting at the base, going to the spot, then back and forth, back and forth. And for 4 segments total, you start with the Alex payload on board. You navigate around. I'm just going to go down to the diagram here. This is on the order of the size of a football field. There are kind of specific dimensions about kind of the ranges within which these will be spaced, but it's flying around this obstacle. This is basically crossing a beam of this pylon above 50 feet, AGL, above ground level, and then coming around this pylon. This is depicting that the highest point of the vehicle needs to be below 35 feet AGL. And then this is a wall 50 feet high in obstacle 3 here, which you can either go over or around. Obstacle 4 is the same as obstacle 2. And then this spot landing here, there's only 8 foot by 8 foot OZ. And the distance between these uprights of this gate is 28 feet. So you need to enter and exit that OZ through that gate. So you'll fly one of these, you'll land here, then in this case, the timer is paused. Unlike the productivity mission, the timer is paused once you touch down here and the payload handlers go in and they unload the Alex mannequin, then they clear out. And then once you take off again, you can fly empty back, touchdown, fly empty again forwards, and then reload again with the timer pause, reload the Alex mannequin here, and then fly that final segment in that reverse direction back to the base. And that's when the timer stops to determine the fastest time. Okay, so those are the three missions. I will go through, there are a handful of sections here of just other things you need to know. Important to mention that things like the locations of these obstacles and pylons are not going to be provided to you precisely. So so you will not have like pre-surveyed information of where these things are. Same thing for like where the OZs are in the adversity mission and things like that. So figuring out where these things are in order to go around them closely and not hitting them, that is part of the challenge here. So that's a big part of what the spirit of competition is talking about. This primary payload, Alex, there are some details here, including the model number and a hyperlink, so you can go look up exactly the information. There will also be a webinar specifically about the payload so that you can get a sense of like how flexible are the joints and things like that. This payload will be provided, and the other payloads are provided at the competition. So for your own testing, you can choose to purchase one of these, and GoAERO has negotiated a discount for you, or you can just make something that mimics it pretty well, and that'll be perfectly good for your own testing prior to the event. So you don't necessarily have to acquire one of these, but the details on this you can get through the link, and then there'll also be that webinar. There's some more information here on the transport of the system, so the ground transportation, about the being a highway legal vehicle. In this case, highway legal in different jurisdictions has different height limits. So in this case, we're using a 13.5-foot height limit. And another thing important to mention, like a big part of the reason that GoAERO has this ground transport requirement has to do with the logistics of running competition. So keep that in mind of being able to get on site and set up is, you might have to do that the morning of the competition. You might not get prior day access and things like that. So it's an important and interesting capability for these systems, but it's not necessarily that important for all applications. But for the purposes of so I don't want you to think that would restrict you from developing a system that can be commercially viable for an application that doesn't require being moved around in a trailer. But for this GoAERO competition, it's just important, even if it's not important for your target commercial application, it's important for the competition and running the logistics. So, and it also is measured in that productivity mission. Also talking about speed and logistics is just being able to move your system around in the area over the venue is important. So you need to be able to do it with not too many people, just a couple of people, and ideally you can use your ground transport vehicle for that purpose. But you also have no limits on dollies and tugs and things like that help aid you in that. Just you need to know that you need to be prepared to do that, and that might require some additional engineering or being able to jack the thing up on wheels or whatever it may be, just so you can move around the venue. Section 2.4, this is where, I mentioned that the aggregate performance in the three missions determines who wins that $1 million top prize. It's based on a system of points, basically completion points, rank points, and bonus points. Completion points are what they sound like. You get points every time you complete a mission. In addition to that, if you aren't able to fully complete a mission, right, and this could be due to making a mistake or not kind of getting as far as you wanted to, then there are still some points for partial completion of the mission. So in productivity, that's just a lower threshold than that 1,250 pounds. If you only do 700 pounds, then you still get the partial completion credit. In adversity, it's any one of the operation zones. If it was not done correctly or omitted, then that's partial completion. And then for that maneuvering mission, if you messed up on one obstacle one time or didn't make that final last segment of flying in the reverse direction with the payload, that's also the partial completion definition. Rank points are basically 10 points to the first place finisher in each mission and 4 points to the second place finisher in each mission. The caveat there is that who is first and second place ignores anyone who isn't eligible for that top prize. So this is, in other words, it's not possible to spoil rank points for somebody else just by being super good at one mission without being able to do the other ones. So these points are only given to those who are eligible to win the top prize. And that eligibility is based on getting 30 or more completion points, which can either be done by partially completing everything or fully completing one mission and partially completing at least one other. There's some bonus points here. There's an operating crew bonus point where if you're able to finish a mission using only a single operating crew member. So this excludes staging operations, but includes, like for the productivity mission, that would include the deployment phase, right? Setting up the vehicle. So that's worth some bonus points. There's a workload bonus point system as well that has to do with the amount that the operator is touching the controls during the mission. And so if it's if it's a lot of like real-time inputs, then there won't be any workload bonus points. If the total mission is completed with less than 30 total seconds of operators touching the controls, and this will be measured just by like literally looking and saying, hey, are your fingers touching anything? And then finally, if a mission is able to be completed with 0 operator inputs touching the controls, then that's worth even more points on that workload bonus. And then the caveat there is that when payload handlers are active, so that's applicable to the productivity or the maneuvering mission, then inputs are okay. And touching I'd say that touching the controls is okay. And that's just a safety thing. We don't want any disincentive to being able to have a human truly and confirm, yes, it's okay for this thing to start, say, spinning up and becoming live. We want to make sure that people are far away from it and safe to do that. And then finally, there's the deployment bonus, which has to do with the in that productivity mission, if you're able to deploy, get ready to fly after arriving on site in less than 2 minutes or under 5 minutes, there are 2 tiers of bonus points for that. You need to be able to deploy quickly and fly a bit, and with payload, so that to prove that you're actually deployed to an airworthy state. But it's not the full like 700 or 1250 pound threshold. It's just a little bit to show that. So you can still get those deployment bonus points even if you aren't able to fully complete that productivity mission. There's some stuff on tie breaking, stuff on penalties. Penalties are, if you were to screw up in some way, going out of bounds of an operation zone would be kind of a good example of one where you touched outside the lines, or you just like touched anything that you're not allowed to touch. In the maneuvering mission, for example, you're explicitly allowed to touch those obstacles as long as they aren't destroyed or no longer effective as obstacles, for either for you on your next segment or for the next team that uses the course. Penalties also for not being able to stage and unstage your system, intentionally damaging the payloads. And this is not a comprehensive. This is the comprehensive list of things that are only worth point deductions, but it is not a comprehensive list of the things that could get you disqualified, either from the mission, right, having that mission totally nullified, or disqualification from the whole competition. So just keep that in mind, that if you're, general unsportsmanlike conduct is not going to be, can be penalized with full disqualification. So there's some talk here about that field of play being kind of unpredictable and intentionally not precisely given to you, because that's part of the challenge. This talks about the uncrewed operations, of course. A big part of that is, depending on your control scheme, it's going to have more or less, it's going to be more or less difficult for you to show that your risk of being, having an excursion beyond course boundaries is mitigated, for example. Here's, some of the fine print about takeoff and landing definition, right? Which is, this is really getting into the minutia of like, oh, exactly when does the timer start and things like that. And then the last section here is on mission order and attempts, where, like I keep saying, long weekend. So this will be a 2 or 3 day event. There will be, and it's a rain or shine event, so there will be an equitable system of assigning time slots to attempt these missions. And if reattempts are possible, right, if the schedule allows and the number of competitors allows, then there will be an equitable system for arranging that as well. But in general, the advice is to not necessarily count on it, and that there's definitely an advantage of being able to perform on the first attempt for all these missions. That's all I have. I'll leave this up as like a little summary while we do Q&A. Hopefully this is visible.
Yes, great. Thank you, Sky. And as we mentioned before, please use the Q&A function in the Zoom platform to ask your questions. If you're having any trouble with the Q&A, you can also use the chat. So we'll get started with the questions now. It looks like we have just several logistical questions. Someone just registered today. Can you please show where to register for next week's expert lecture? Absolutely. Will we be sending information for that registration tomorrow morning, and you'll be able to register just like you did for this webinar and participate for that. For reference, it will be on Monday at 11 a.m. Eastern time. So Monday, April 29th at 11 a.m. Eastern time, if you'd like to put a hold on your calendar. And as we mentioned, we'll be sharing the details for registration tomorrow morning. There's a question, if we don't win the money prizes in the first two phases, can you still participate in the third phase? Absolutely. The stages are not gates. You are able to participate in all of the stages, in one of the stages and two of the stages. It is entirely up to you. We encourage you to participate in all three so that you have an opportunity to engage with innovators throughout, and that you're able to utilize all of the resources and support that we will provide for you. However, you do not need to win any of the stages in order to then go on to the next stage and participate. Sky, if you do not know the layout of the flight course, how would autonomous flight work? How would we program a course for the drones to fly autonomously?
So that's an almost philosophical question. So, and the use of the word autonomous is very loaded in that case. And autonomy is just one of those terms that means different things to different people. One of my personal skyisms is that if every human has a driver's license, then every car is autonomous, right? In some sense, right? Because a car with a passenger in it and a human who's able to drive the car, that thing can operate autonomously on its own within the bounds of that system. It can make its own decisions. It can figure out where obstacles are. And similarly for this, if you have an autonomous system that is able to perceive its environment and determine what things are where and what it needs to do about them, then that would be the autonomous approach. So it requires sensing rather than just open loop dead reckoning or GPS waypoint navigation. And that is part of the challenge. And the interesting ways to do that are the things that make, those are the types of problems to work on that lead to nice, practical, real world, useful systems that don't require highly trained, highly skilled operators. And that's really what we're working toward here, because needing highly trained, highly skilled, licensed commercial aviators for every aerial operation is a real hindrance toward the more widespread impact of aircraft being useful for public good missions. So I hope that answers the question, but if not, ask a follow-up.
The next question is, I just want to make sure, absolutely sure, that this competition is open to individuals. Yes, the competition is open to individuals. You are able to participate on your own or as a collective with other team members. We do encourage you to utilize the HeroX.com platform to engage with your fellow innovators so that you are able to connect with other people throughout the process. Sky, should the aerial systems be AI-enabled, fully autonomous, semi-autonomous, or semi-autonomous with human in the loop?
So should has entirely to do with, if I go back to here and I talk about like the the points here. This workload bonus points, if you parse it, those different levels that we're just asked about are kind of correlate well with these different levels. There's, a human never has to touch the controls. A human only has to touch a little bit, and a human is touching the controls all the time. And those are kind of one way to measure a few different levels of quote unquote autonomy. Should is a question that's entirely a trade-off. And this is intentional, that this question of how autonomous should my system be, that's intentional for that to be a very interesting trade study for teams to do and to think about what would make most sense for them that balances the development cost, the development risk, and the performance, weight impact and performance and things like that, because that trade-off is an interesting one for the real world. It's an interesting one for this competition. And that is entirely up to teams, kind of what approach they want to take and which approach that they think is best. And that, some of that is going to have to do with, the expertise that exists on the team, or it might have to do with kind of a target follow-on concept of operations and market, or whatever it may be. But in terms of what is best for winning the competition, you can see here that there are definitely bonus points for having low operator workload, but it's also capped, right? So it's capped in such a way that there might be some missions where it makes a lot more sense to be more autonomous than others, and you can use that. You can also use that to your advantage when you're thinking about your strategy, how you want to attack, maximizing your performance and your chances of winning that top prize.
Gwen, if you can address, what does it look like in terms of IP as teams move through the competition process? What ownership do other companies have over our product?
Teams keep their own intellectual property. So no one has ownership over teams' intellectual property except for the team. The one caveat to all of that is that GoAERO asks teams to sign a media rights agreement, which allows GoAERO to publicize the team's participation in the event for media use. And there is some language that you've already all seen in the stage 1 documents that also allow us to publicize. But in terms of the underlying IP and the technology, the teams keep their own IP.
Yeah, a good follow-on to that is that the media rights are really, it's free publicity for teams. And it's easy to imagine that for some teams, that publicity that comes from doing well in this competition could be worth, a lot to them, on the same order as the prize money too. So the other thing is that through the competition, and we haven't talked a lot about stage 1 and stage 2, but where you have to submit materials, that is also protected, right? So that media rights agreement doesn't mean that that GoAERO is going to publish all your technical details. That's still very protected. And the only thing that you have to provide that can be shown publicly is a quote, publicly releasable image, which could be, blurry and abstract if you really want it to be. So your IP is very protected and you still own it through this competition. I think that's a really important thing to emphasize. I know that kind of a lot of challenges of the thing have sort of IP assignments, but this is IP stays with the teams.
Okay. How will the duration of the operator input be measured?
That's going to be just measured visually. So there will be a lot of basically course marshals and officials at the competition, and they will be watching everything that goes on, and things will also be recorded. So that's going to be, literal physical touching of any sort of affordance or input.
Sky, can you tell the computer to take off and land fly to new OZs, or do we need to be able to have it? Do we need to have planned all those movements before taking off, so there's no input to the computer during operation in order to get the bonus?
Either strategy is appropriate. If you have a system that is able to complete the mission without having operator inputs, then that's worth some bonus points. But if you don't have a system, if you need to have constant input, or if you need to do several inputs, but they're short, right? If they're short inputs and they in aggregate total to less than 30 seconds, then that's also worth the bonus points as well. And that 30 seconds is in there to represent a tier of what's commonly called simplified vehicle operations, where and it lets teams explore that space of using humans where humans are best suited and using machines where machines are best suited. Where and in, right, because it might be that getting something that is 100% autonomous all the time costs 1,000 times more in terms of development time and hardware and software and things like that than just having a human be a participant at the right time at the right moment. So that's it. And there's innovation to be done and good work and good integration to be done in the space of figuring out where it makes sense for humans to be involved and where it doesn't, and really good human machine interfaces. And those sorts of things are also just really enabling in general, kind of for the industry and for products.
Gwen, do you have a cost estimate of what you want the single system to ultimately shoot for? A cost per unit based on initial buy?
No, there is no cost estimate that we provide or prefer. There is a broad white space for design for all of our teams, and that not only includes the technology and the inputs and everything that we've been speaking about, but also how you build and the materials that you use. And so therefore we expect that teams will have quite different costs for their builds and quite different costs for their end products. So too, as a global competition, materials around the world differ in prices. And so we allow teams to participate wherever they are located and do not factor cost into the point system for the prize.
Yeah. So the only place where cost may come up is that in the stage 1 and stage 2 submissions, part of showing part of the scoring has to do with, yes, your technical approach, but also your project plan for showing that you are able to fund your project and execute on your project. And so there's an opportunity there if funding your project has a lot to do with developing a product and have that product being affordable, then there is an opportunity in there for you to highlight that if that's a big part of what your focus is, but it's not required to focus on that if that isn't part of your strategy.
Yeah, the purposes of the competition are really to push innovation, right? So at this stage, the price of the actual final product is something that is not the focus. The focus is the innovation, the design, and ultimately creating and building something that will take you through the course. Sky, will we be allowed to walk the course before the competition begins when we get there?
No. Short answer. So that is kind of, like I said, part of the intent of these courses is to be unknown, just like the majority of public good missions, whether it's a different mountain range that this wildfire is on, or a different street in the city, or a different location. That unsurveyed nature is a really core part of making systems that are useful for public good missions.
How do we find one-on-one mentors? It's a great question. We would encourage you to go to herox.com/GoAERO. Under the Documents tab, you will actually find a document that says Request a Mentor, and you will complete the form explaining what kind of mentorship or expertise you are looking for, where you're located, how much support you need, and we'll do our very best to match you up with a mentor who can support you in the areas that you are requesting. You can request different areas of expertise, and we can do our very best to connect you with multiple people. As Gwen noted in the presentation early on, You'll see also that you have expert lectures that will be running through the course of the next 18 months that will be providing you, again, with a great deal of information. Those expert lectures will also be posted to herox.com/GoAERO. So you can also find a great deal of expertise and information there as well. Sky, do we have to use a single vehicle for all of the challenges? Can we use multiple vehicles with the exact same configuration if one experienced a crash on one of the tasks?
So that's addressed here in section 2.9, where accessory equipment, right, which isn't well defined here, is allowed to be swapped out. But what is talked about is the core aircraft and its elements need to be the same for all the missions, and the replacement parts are the same things for something that broke, right? That's okay, but saying like, oh, we're gonna completely do a different type of powertrain or a different airframe, that's what's not okay here. And it is admittedly a bit subjective here, but hopefully here the wording of this section 2.9 is such that you understand that the spirit of the rule is that a single design, so to speak, is able to accomplish all the missions.
So alongside that, how many aircraft will be flying at the same time during the actual competition?
So that has to do with the number of participants, but at the extreme case, there are enough participants that multiple copies of the courses will need to be set up. And so there could be, for example, it could be that a large handful of participants are all flying the productivity course at the same time, right? Where you could we might have a lot of courses set up next to each other. But that said, they won't be flying it. Everything will be kind of partitioned off. So each course will have its own boundaries, and there will not be crossing a boundary. So each team will have the space of that course to themselves. So if that was the question of like same time using the same course, that's not going to be happening. But there could be other aircraft in the air at the same time, just in a different area.
When it comes to media, what are we allowed to post about our team? As in, posting media and our process would be beneficial for us to raise funds and find sponsors and donors. Are we allowed to do our own publicity and media too?
Yes, we encourage teams to engage with media and posting and however they need to do. So we ask, and these are in the documents as well, we ask that you notify us ahead of time of what you would like to do so that we are aware, and we collaborate with all teams on helping them with their media presence, and helping them to get out the word about their teams and what they are working on.
Sky, there's a question about the full stop of all rotating parts. Is there leeway in this? Waiting for rotors to spin down every time would be extremely time consuming, and excessive rotor brake use could be more hazardous than safe approach.
So I think I know what this is referring to. So in the courses where payload handlers are used, they need to stay 50 feet away from the OZ borders when the aircraft is in flight. And then they aren't allowed to get within 3 feet of still moving systems when they're operating near the aircraft. And so they're allowed, so it is allowed to keep things running and spinning while payload handlers are close by. They just can't get really close. And if they do get really close, there needs to be something in between them and the thing that's moving. So in this case, static aircraft structure, right? And so a good way to think of that is if you were to trip and fall and you were to reach out to catch yourself, would the first thing you touch be a spinning thing or a moving thing? So that's another way to phrase this sort of language. And this language shows up both here as well as in the productivity mission. So there is no requirement to fully stop everything. And in fact, this is, I would say what's written is let's see, where was it? So, yeah, here, same thing. If you're within a meter of the aircraft, then there needs to be something in between that payload handler and the moving parts. And that said, this is an aspect of the safe operation of your system, and you should not think that if you meet the letter of these requirements, that means that your system is totally safe. You should think about what are your operations and what are your designs and what are your interfaces like to ensure that those payload handlers are safe in what they're doing during this competition.
Okay, section 2.3b states that the aircraft must be ready to fly after 15 minutes with, I assume, mission timer starting after 10 minutes. This seems to be different from what is stated in the deployment rules of the productivity mission. Can you explain how we are to read this rule and apply it?
So yeah, so I think that this question is asking, how come you get more time for your productivity mission setup versus versus this like general one of being ready to go within 50 minutes. So this applies mostly to the non-productivity missions because the ready to go part. The reason for that is that your productivity mission requires you to start on your ground transport vehicle, whereas it might be for some teams that your system isn't optimized to be set up from a ground transport vehicle, right? And so you need that full, say, half an hour to set it up, right? To get it off the vehicle, unfold, attach things, whatever it may be. Whereas for going to do another mission, it might be that your vehicle is already unfolded to full size, right? That wouldn't meet the highway width requirements. And all you're doing is putting it on a dolly and like tugging it around over a hard surface. And in that case, that's why it's not expected that you would need as much time because you don't have that extra constraint of being kind of a highway compliant configuration. And for some teams that, they might use their ground transport vehicle, but with the vehicle unfolded or whatever it may be. And for some, they say, no, it's easier to just move it around on this dolly that we developed separately and not use our ground transport vehicle. And so that's why you don't have that extra constraint, which means you are expected to be able to set it more quickly because you can have the thing, pretty much ready to go. And all you're doing is you have the thing in its ready to fly configuration. You're just moving it from one place to another rather than moving it from one place to another and taking it from a roadable configuration to a ready to fly configuration.
Is Alex meant to be flown as a mock patient or a pilot?
That is team's choice. So if we go to the discussion of the payload, Alex needs to be secured in the aircraft in a reasonable position with plausible restraints. And here's the phrasing used as active or passive human occupant. Active or passive, or anything in between. This could be phrased as anything and everything. We're trying to not constrain you into what you're imagining Alex's role to be. Alex could be a pilot who's very active. Alex could be a totally unconscious patient being rescued. Alex could be a perfectly fit and ambulatory person who isn't a pilot, who isn't necessarily operating the vehicle, but is more of a passenger. And anything else that you might imagine, that is to give you as much freedom as possible in configuring your vehicle for what makes sense, as long as you have Alex in some sort of plausible position that a human might be in and plausibly restrained.
So alongside that, Sky, must the loading of the dummy be carried out, of Alex, be carried out following the rules for transporting injured people, such as immobilizing the cervical area or immobilizing the back with a spinal stretcher?
No. And in fact, that's a constraint that you don't have to deal with for this competition. And, if for your system, your concept of operations has Alex as, an operator or an EMT or a firefighter or whatever it may be, then unlike one of those people, Alex is not able to walk. Alex is just a dummy. And so you know, a lot of that transport is just going to be the inelegant manhandling of a floppy dead weight of 125 pounds, which is a non-trivial thing to do, right? With a couple of people. So a lot of that is just going to be trying to do your best to move something that is trying to mimic a human who should normally be able to move themselves. But there's no constraints of treating Alex like a patient or anything like that. You don't have to do that. If your system is set up, for example, of, you know, being centered around a stretcher or something like that, and you're like, oh, the first step to putting Alex on board is putting Alex on a stretcher, like that's fine, you can do that, but it's not a requirement. I guess I could even click this to just give you a visual of this dummy. So like the joints are relatively flexible. It's 5'5" tall, and it's able to go in kind of a seated position as well from here. And these are exactly the sort of things we'll look at the webinar, is so you can understand like, oh, exactly how much can the waist spend and things like that. So you can understand what are the positions that could be reasonable for this particular dummy.
So just to clarify, we will be having a webinar specific to Alex with the representative from Simulades in the next couple of weeks as well. And we will be sharing the details of that very soon and give you an opportunity to register and participate. Sky, we talked just recently about the multiple aircraft flying around at the same time on the course potentially. How are we going to handle possible command and control interference?
So that's basically TBD, and a lot of that's going to have to do with the venue choice as well. So the actual venue of where this is going to be held isn't locked down yet. One thing, so all we're able to say that's published right now is things like when your system isn't being used, being able to show, hey, it's safe and we're not transmitting, like, and being able to ensure that and have that be visible, to be able to look at your system and say like, okay, cool, that's a safe system. That isn't going to cause interference. So think ahead to being able to include that sort of feature and capability in your system, as well as, you know, if two teams are using the same frequency for command and control, then that's something that we're going to have to deconflict, and that adds an extra constraint to the scheduling. But at this stage, I wouldn't say that you need to. You shouldn't necessarily assume that, oh my goodness, no matter, I can't use a popular frequency because I'm definitely going to have interference. I wouldn't let that constrain you. You should choose what makes most sense for you in your case, and you know, moving forward, that it's a relatively safe assumption that any potential interference will be able to work that out, and you shouldn't let that over constrain your system development.
Gwen, when it comes to sponsors, who are we allowed to reach out to? What can we promise them? And how should we go about running potential sponsors by GoAERO?
So in terms of sponsors, we ask that you notify us who they are. There is on the website in the documents section a sponsor approval form. So we ask that you fill that out and notify us. In terms of how you work your sponsorship with your sponsors, you have a tremendous amount of freedom there. If your sponsors want logos on your aircraft, that is between you all. We ask that you notify us though, and fill out that sponsor approval form.
We are at time. However, we will keep going with the questions that we have remaining as well we can. For those of you who are unable to continue to participate, the webinar is being recorded, and we will be posting it and sending it out via email, as well as posting it on herox.com/GoAERO. Before you jump off, if you aren't already registered at herox.com, we do encourage you to do so right away, so that again, you have access to all of the information that we are sharing here, as well as the updates on all of the upcoming expert lectures, and so that you can also see the stage 1 submission form, the criteria, and engage with innovators around the world via the forum. So our next question, are the external dimensions limited? Does it matter for the competition?
So the external dimensions are not explicitly limited. So where it comes into play is for fitting on the ground transport configuration, right? Your trailerable or truckable configuration, as well as in missions like this maneuvering mission, where smaller is going to make it easier, and then there is this explicit gate that is now that's starting to get to be a constraint on the in-flight width and height of the vehicle, that 28-foot width. But other than that, there's no kind of explicit requirements on dimensions. Oh, I guess one thing to mention is like your wheel track and wheelbase, or you don't necessarily have wheels and tires, but you get the idea. The size of your footprint of your undercarriage touching the ground is going to be constrained by the size of the different OZs that you need to take off and land from.
During the competition, how much time is anticipated between missions? Will there be enough time to recharge batteries, or should we plan on swap out of batteries?
So that's going to be the best way to answer that is to say that's part of the tactics and your strategy of your approach to the competition, keeping in mind that it is a rain or shine event, and that over the course of a weekend, it might be that there's only 3/4 of a day to get in all your attempts. So in that sense, it's a big advantage to be able to keep up a high operational tempo, but it is not an explicit requirement, and it's also, and because it's not an explicit requirement, it's not something that GoAERO is going to impose on teams. They're like, oh, you have to be able to do back-to-back missions or anything like that. So we'll do our best to accommodate and have an equitable way of allocating like time slots throughout the weekend and things like that don't hinder you, with the caveat that, given weather and other constraints, and there might be a lot of competitors and you might not get your choice of time slots, given, if you need morning with calm winds and things like that, then there definitely is an advantage to being able to sustain a higher operational tempo and doing back-to-back missions and attempts. There's definitely a slight advantage there. So that's a succinct way to put it.
There are a couple of questions as it relates to the stage 1 submission. What is the maximum minimum page length of the report? Can we submit the design report in a PowerPoint? And if so, how many pages? And are video presentations allowed as an addendum to the main report?
So let's see, I'll go kind of in order. There's a maximum page length of the technical design report, which is 18 pages. These are US letter size pages, and there's no minimum page length. So you can make it shorter if you like, and I'm certain some of the judges will appreciate that. If you're able to be really succinct in your description of your system, that's awesome. The question about as a PowerPoint presentation, the report has to be a PDF document. And technically, if you wanted to make a PDF of your PowerPoint presentation and each page in the digital dimensions was less than 8.5 by 11 inches, right, portrait or landscape, then that could still technically meet the requirements of the design report. So technically, yes, but keep in mind how this will be read and sent as a PDF to the judges who are reading it. So you just want to make sure that it's clear and easy to understand. And then there was another part about video presentations.
Yes.
Right. So I think that, I'll have to look that up, and I think I can do that really quickly, actually. I don't think that for stage 1, we're asking for videos, and I don't think that there's an opportunity to do videos in stage 1.
I don't believe so.
Yeah. So in stage 1, there isn't. In stage 2, we're explicitly asking for video to prove that you flew your prototype. And so there's that. And then in addition to that, you have other opportunities to say, hey, here's other videos that showcase other things that we've done in the real world that show that we've like mitigated some risks, or that we validated some aspect of our system, or whatever it may be. So that's, or that, our system is more capable than just this bare minimum flight that's the requirement. So there's opportunity in stage 2, but for stage 1, there isn't an opportunity to add on videos.
Okay, we have one final question. In the maneuver final landing pad is 8x8. Can we put our own target with markings on a PVC tarp down, or is it marked?
So the borders will be marked, and no, you can't put down your own target. So there won't be, April tags or anything like that on any of the obstacles. But there will be, the OZ's borders will be marked in a way that makes it obvious to a person looking at it that that is where the OZ is. Now, just we know that getting machines to be as good as people isn't always so straightforward, but that is kind of the guideline that GoAERO has for itself to be able to set up the different mission elements. Is we want it to be obvious to a person looking at it that, oh yeah, that's what it is. Oh, that's where I need to land. Oh yeah, that's the obstacle I need to go around, that sort of thing. So that's the idea there. And so and it's intentional. Also, again, back to these public good missions, not operating in highly sanitized, pre-surveyed environments. It's important to show that your system is robust and adaptable to those sort of unknown, unsurveyed situations.
Okay, so we are well over time now, so we will wrap up the webinar today. Thank you so much again to everyone who participated and for all of your questions. As we noted previously, the recording of the webinar will be shared and posted to everyone tomorrow, and you will also find it on the website at herox.com/GoAERO. If you have any questions, we ask that you please post them to the forum, and we will certainly engage with you there. If there is something that you need to reach us privately, you can also email us at info@goaeroprize.com. Thank you again so much, and we look forward to your participation in the competition.